Okay, I'm back.
Boys are back in town. Boys are back in town. Boys are back in town. All right, let's get started. We're wasting our time.
Hi, I'm Jacob Kenny.
And I'm Lee McPherson.
It's the newest edition of your Millwright's favorite podcast. It's Speech from the Throne, episode 24.
We're here to bring you the latest and greatest from the halls of power.
We're not with another conspiracy theory about Justin Trudeau stealing fertilizer from hardworking, starving prairie farmers. We're just here to argue.
Hey, Jacob, what are we talking about today?
Well, Liam, two massively important events occurred in Alberta, my home province, this week. And only one of them, sadly, I think, has received even close to the level of scrutiny and political response necessary. So obviously the first one was in Grande Prairie, the far north of Alberta. Minister Freeland, the finance minister, as deputy prime minister, was verbally assaulted, you could say, by a man known by his friends as Moose, because he's a big guy, and it was definitely a scary altercation. He was yelling, he called her some incredibly nasty words, told her to F off, called her a traitorous B-word, stuff of that nature. And very quickly, a video of this got circulated on social media. It was talked about all over our mainstream media. And MPs in the House of Commons, whether they be all parties, stood up to denounce the actions of this particular individual. And the Minister of Public Safety went even further. He called it an attack on democracy. Now, it's an interesting phrase because I actually do think that there was a very real attack on democracy that occurred also in Alberta in the same week. But I wouldn't say that, as harrowing as it was, this verbal barrage was that assault on democracy. Instead, I would be much more concerned with the story that was much less reported upon. And that was, in Edmonton this week, Danielle Smith took the stage with other contenders to replace Jason Kenney, both as Premier of Alberta and leader of the United Conservative Party. And Danielle Smith, the prohibitive favorite right now, the one who's been signing up tens of thousands of members to the party, the one that seems to have all the energy behind her, easily the front runner of the race, said that she's been looking through her old copy of the British North America Act, and she's realizing that maybe Alberta, it shouldn't just have total control of its immigration law. It shouldn't just have total control of its environmental law. It should have the right to not enforce any federal law it does not like. And she wants her own separate Alberta police force and public pension fund to ensure that her stance on the law prevails. This is a threat to democracy. This is setting up a constitutional crisis. And Danielle Smith, unlike other premiers and prospective leaders, is acting like someone who really doesn't seem like she has any respect whatsoever for the rule of law. And considering that she continues talking about getting a separate Alberta police force, and she's inviting people, the angriest, the most unsettling elements of the public into her camp, perhaps exactly the same sort of people that were yelling epithets at Minister Freeland, we have every reason to think that she is not going to act in the same way in a constitutional crisis that every premier would. We have every reason to think that if the Supreme Court disagreed with Danielle Smith's interpretation of the British North America Act, she might not accept that. And that is an assault on democracy. That's the thing that we need to have MPs from both sides of the House, from the Conservative side, from the Liberal side, standing up and denouncing. This Moose, as scary as he was, as horrible as the language was, he's just a random member of the public. It doesn't matter what a random person thinks. Danielle Smith, someone that could become the leader of Alberta, it does matter what she thinks. And it does matter how the Conservative movement in Alberta evolves, because that is the heartland of the Conservative movement in Canada overall. And so if the stronghold of conservatism in Canada falls to this sort of crazy sovereigntist, we have no idea how that movement could evolve in the nation overall. And so if we're trying to prioritize our threats to democracy, it's not some guy yelling to an elevator in Grande Prairie. It's Danielle Smith who's willing to completely barrage our rule of law on stage for the whole nation to see, and sadly, for now, for the whole nation to ignore.
There's lots to chew on there, and as I always like to say, I'll get into it. It's going to take me a little while, but basically, I completely agree that Danielle Smith is, God, she's had a reputation for years as being some sort of crackpot. But sadly, crackpots are what people seem to want now, particularly, unfortunately, in the prairies and in right-wing circles across this country. And she's appealing to definitely what people want at the moment, and it's leading to some very serious consequences, because first people decided around the time of Donald Trump's first election that he ran for president in 2016. So we've been living this worsening climate for 6 years now.
Yep.
People started in 2016 to sort of want somebody who was less kind of scripted and more like, I don't know, openly racist, I guess, and mean. I don't know. Yep. So, like, you know, they started to kind of, I think they were tired of these politicians kind of sounding like a script and not, you know, breaking their promises, and just decades of failed neoliberalism kind of came to a flashpoint. And basically, it's now evolved from, I want somebody who admits that other politicians are shit and talks tough and blah, 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 to, I want somebody who sides with my every fantasy, even if it's completely detached from reality. Because for a lot of these people, it is their reality. They don't trust the mainstream media. They've turned to alternative sources. And I put those in quotes because most of them are grifts by people just looking to make money off of these. And I say poor people, not because I like what they say, but because they've fallen so far down the rabbit hole, they're almost completely lost. I didn't tell you this, Jacob, in our preamble before the recording, but I just spent most of yesterday evening and part of today arguing with a white male who was trying to explain what racism is to me.
And did you learn something?
Yeah, I learned that a lot of white people still don't seem to understand what racism is. And I think that's a dimension here. I think that the failed neoliberalism and overly scripted politics is a factor here. I think that discontent with progress in this country is a factor here. I think there's all kinds of things that are feeding into this. However, that does not also mean that man who accosted Chrystia Freeland so that her staffers had to surround her to keep her away from this giant man, that is not a threat to democracy. I agree with you. I think the Danielle Smith issue hasn't gotten enough attention. But by the same token, I think it's important we keep talking about the harassment that politicians and journalists are facing. It's not that they've never been harassed before. It's not that there haven't been a few crazies in the past, but we're seeing this reach a fever pitch that we've never seen it reach before. The UK has already had 2 politicians killed by nut bars who just lost touch with reality and decided to go pop a cap in them. And I would argue we're not too far off from that in Canada. It's getting very dangerous. And I mean, that being said, I don't think the left has responded effectively at all to any of this. You know, they're very focused on fighting them, but we're fighting them on moral standards that we have that other people don't. And it's not that we aren't morally correct, and it's not that we shouldn't still keep fighting on moral standards, but we need to compound that with something that is going to actually make a difference. For me, the way we fight against people like Danielle Smith, the way that we fight against people like Pierre Poilievre, the way that we fight against people like Ben Shapiro is to engage in their games. And I don't mean being a racist piece of shit or being a homophobic piece of shit.
I'm afraid we can't do that better than they do. They really have the market cornered on that one.
What I mean is, clearly the right wing has bot farms and troll farms running. And for the listeners that don't know what those are quite literally institutions that are set up to essentially send out a bunch of bots. So they're sort of like these AIs, and they look like real people, but upon careful examination of about 30 seconds, you can tell they're not real. But when you're just looking at them in the replies, you think they're real. So they'll flood all these sites with, pro right wing opinions and things, and people think they're real. Or troll farms as well. These are real humans that are being paid by grifters or right wing figures to troll. So they'll troll left-wingers or whatever and cause a stir and make left-wingers look like a fool, which makes people go, haha, look at the funny right-winger, and it gains them support and blah, blah, blah. The left needs to start doing the same too, not because, God, if we didn't have to do, I wish we didn't have to do this, but clearly it's time to start playing their game. Let's infiltrate their operations. Let's set up our own bot farms. Let's set up our own troll farms. Not because this is something that I ever think we should have to do. It's that we must do this, or we're never going to dismantle this infrastructure. If we can't keep up with the infrastructure, if we can't effectively respond to the infrastructure that is swaying so many people on the side of right-wing grifters and disruptors, we're never going to win this fight.
The reason why I am so annoyed at the response to the Freeland story is that I think that the way that it's been discussed, it reeks of weakness on the left. Us appealing to a moral standard that, as you hinted in your opening remarks there, is not necessarily shared by both sides of the political conversation anymore.
Different values, different morals.
Well, yeah, we lived through that with Donald Trump. I mean, like in the whole 2016 election, I remember Michelle Obama's famous advice that worked so well for Hillary Clinton of, when they go low, we go high. And of course, Hillary Clinton went on to use that advice to win the presidency in 2016, and now she's a great leader that united the whole Western world. Like, no, it didn't work. It doesn't work. The right could not give less of a shit about how their politicians behave in public. It's only the left and our pearl clutchers that care about that anymore. They don't care if you swear in public anymore. They don't care if you say nasty names. They don't care if you publicly call for the jailing and execution of their oppositions, apparently. They haven't cared for a while. And, it absolutely sucks that is the case. But we're not going to solve that problem by lecturing to them. And it reeks of weakness that all we do is stand up and denounce them and say, well, we think that you're acting badly, and we think that you need to, grow up.
As if that's going to solve the problem.
Exactly. That doesn't solve the problem.
It's not that we shouldn't denounce it, by the way. That's not what you're saying. You're not saying that it shouldn't be denounced. You're saying that it's ineffective to just denounce it, right?
Well, exactly. The denouncement doesn't need to happen in the Houses of Parliament. It needs to happen in that room in Grand Prairie. The denouncement needs to be immediately, once that guy stands up and says, hey, Freeland, you're a traitorous B-word, there needs to be a group of other leftists on the corner that says, fuck you, man, you're the traitor, or something of that nature. Like, they need to shut him down immediately. And if you're, as a minister, if you're in a room where you're saying things that are so unpopular that when a member of the public stands up and yells at you, and there isn't a bunch of people that are willing to stand up and support you and fight back, I think you have a problem with your own messaging. You should never be in a situation where you're getting accosted like that and the public doesn't try to defend you. That's the way you defend yourself. That's how you show that you're strong. You show that you have genuine support from the public. In the House of Parliament, all you're showing is that you have support from the people that you're whipping. You have support from people that have no choice but to say that they support you. Of course, the MPs are going to say that this is wrong, and this is just the political class talking to the political class. I think fundamentally, what we need to show is that ordinary people think that this is wrong. Ordinary people still support Freeland. Ordinary people do not want their politicians to be accosted this way, and those are exactly the type of people that are not being involved in the discussion. And so, and I do think that the way that media covered these two stories last week has really amplified the discussion, because people in Alberta are angry, and they're angry for a lot of reasons that probably are not necessarily justified. I mean, we have no choice but to scale back our energy production. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people, particularly in the north around Grand Prairie, that are going to get absolutely fucked over by that decision. But we have no choice but to do that. And that's going to make people angry. This week, the House of Parliament basically said, you don't get to be angry. You're not allowed to be angry. Someone like Danielle Smith is saying, I understand that you're angry, and I have a solution to your anger. And that's why she's signing up tens of thousands of people. That's why she's the prohibitive favorite to replace Jason Kenney. You cannot just tell people that they're not allowed to be angry. They're angry. You can't tell them to behave. You can't tell them that they're toddlers, that they need to, clean themselves up before they enter the public arena. You got to admit that they're angry, and you have to provide a solution to their anger. You can't just finger wag and lecture.
You know what's funny is, so I'm guilty, and as I'm sure you are as well, for being sucked into some of this, not the right-wing rhetoric, but some of the ineffective rhetoric that's been thrown at the right, that we've tried to throw at the right as progressives. So look, I'm going to bring it back to the 2021 election here for a minute, and Trudeau was on record for months before the 2021 election saying that he didn't want to impose vaccine mandates. And I'm, by the way, a supporter of vaccine mandates where it's needed. But what I'm leading to saying here is early days of that campaign where protesters were frequently showing up to his events and he was saying, I know you're angry. I understand you're angry. Like we're trying to address your problems. And I mean, he wasn't really trying to concretely address their problems, but those words followed up with action can work better than finger wagging. But what he did is about a week later when Erin O'Toole started surging in the polls, and people started getting more comfortable with the idea of Prime Minister O'Toole, he weaponized vaccine mandates, and that was politically clever, but he did weaponize them. And I do see partisan liberals who say, he didn't weaponize them. Okay, he had the correct stand on vaccine mandates, but he absolutely did beat the Tories over the head with it, and he should have, in my opinion. However, I think the consequences of that have led to a great festering wound that has only gotten worse. I think it even would have been fine if Trudeau had bashed the Tories over the head with vaccine mandates if he'd done something to substantively improve the socioeconomic situation of the people that are upset about this stuff. And I can hear the listeners going, well, how do vaccine mandates relate to any of this? Well, it's because this sort of so-called Freedom Convoy group, or people who support this group, it's not just about the vaccine mandates. It's about conspiracy theories that farmers can't use fertilizer anymore.
That Danielle Smith herself was peddling in that debate.
And it's about white people being replaced, and it's about this, and it's about that. And, Jacob and I were talking about this before, and I said that you can't sit down with the organizers of this movement and make a deal. You just can't. Everyone's like, why don't you meet with them? Why don't you at least just give them a meeting? Because some of them want to execute the prime minister. That's a non-starter. It's just a non-starter. What's not a non-starter, however, is doing something to substantively change the situation that these people found themselves in. So a lot of these people were, and probably still are somewhere deep down there, humans that can be redeemed somehow, but they've fallen into a trap that has been set for them by right-wing grifters who got them all angsty and freaked out about their race being replaced. And here, look at all these conspiracy theories that aren't true, but you're going to believe them because we've made them look like real news articles. And we have our own line of pseudo-academics out there like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson to parrot that. And we have this and we have that. The left doesn't really have that. They don't have that. And I'm not exactly saying let's get our own grifters. I'm saying we need some kind of widespread organized response to that isn't just, I hear you, and then we do nothing. That isn't just weaponizing stuff against them and doing nothing. We need to simultaneously change the structural issues in the country that are feeding this discontent while battling the right-wing grifters with their own medicine, giving them a taste of their own medicine. And just one final thing, listeners, Jacob and I aren't saying that it's, Chrystia Freeland's fault that she was accosted or she should have had a coterie of supporters following her, and like if she had, then she wouldn't have been accosted. But in a way we're saying that, but we're not saying about that particular incident. What we're saying is, during the 2021 election, when protesters showed up, they were shouted down by liberal partisans. So particularly at partisan events, there's an opportunity to shout these people down. If it's not at a partisan event, like obviously Chrystia Freeland couldn't predict that guy was going to roll up. Like I get that. You're not always going to be able to predict that. But we have to do something different here. There has to be something different here.
No, and that's exactly the correct way of doing it. Like if you see all those times that Jagmeet Singh, for example, has been accosted in town halls, when someone sends a racial conspiracy theory at him or some sort of racial invective, he'll respond, and almost in every situation, the town hall will all cheer him and they'll boo the guy that's asking the question. That's how you respond from a place of strength. And that was a clear turning point in the 2021 election when Justin Trudeau went on the attack after that PPC rally that he had been really accosted somewhere in southern Ontario, and then he came back with this massive speech, and he was like the anger was back in the eyes, and the fire was in his step, and there was a wall of people behind him clapping on and supporting him. Exactly. And that's probably, I think, in no small part, a reason why he ended up winning an election that it looked like for a time he could easily have lost. And that's how you come back from a place of strength. You got to show that your side is the most popular side. We leftists I think because we are a little more of an intellectual movement, we're more based. Like there's no doubt that many leftists we come about our views in university where we're always arguing with each other. We're debating like you and I debate on politics on this podcast. We want the political discussion to be like that. We want it to be always about a debate of ideas, and we have an innate belief that our ideas are philosophically correct, and that the more we talk in the domain of ideas, the more the left will automatically win because our ideas are correct. But that's not the way that democracy actually is adjudicated. Democracy is not about who is morally correct. It's not about who is philosophically correct. It's not about whose opinions are the most logical. It's about whose opinions are the most popular. And a lot of people don't have any fucking clue what they truly believe. All they know is, I trust my neighbors, I trust my friends, I trust my family, and I'm going to be on whatever side they are on. So the way that we win in the public sphere is not by having huge treatises where all of our points are laid out. It's not by being morally correct and denouncing people that we think are wrong. It's by showing that we are popular. It's by showing that the grassroots is on our side. It's by showing there's a wall of support behind us and that we have the righteous anger of the whole population at our backs. That is how we defend ourselves, and that is how we grow our movement. And this quibbling about the language that's used in the public space is just so incredibly weak. We have to always be fighting from a place of strength. And again, this is an image that can be easily manufactured. I mean, that's often the goal of these rallies. Is you can pay actors to hold your sign up or whatever, or you can, as your right wing grifters, you can have troll farms. It's very easy to manufacture, but that's the goal. You have to be showing that you're popular. And I think we leftists we're not ready for that level of discussion yet. We're not willing to give up the moral dimension, and that's why we're going to lose. Because the other side doesn't care about that.
So I think I want to pick up on something that you were just talking about. What you were saying there about the language used in public spaces, I assume that's a vague reference to, the left and like things like gender pronouns and things like, and all of that stuff I think is important. I think what I want to tweak about what you just said is like what you said, it's not about the language that's used in a public space. It's about fighting back. It's not about taking a moral stand. It's about this. I think it can be about both, but I think if you're going to win everybody over, as many people as possible over on your side, you have to make it primarily about socioeconomic issues. You have to. We are at a crucial fork in the road where for the first time since, the 70s, maybe before, the left is about to lose the working class. We are losing the working class. They are not on our side right now. Progressive politics and the working class should go hand in hand. Yep. I believe in a strong public state that supports its workers and its citizens. That is a message that appeals to a lot of people, even if they think they don't like it. Everybody, including conservatives, is proud of our, for example, healthcare system. That was something that was not in place until the mid-60s, and it was done by the Liberals and the NDP. I'm sure the Tories probably fought it at the time, but everybody loves it now. It cuts across partisan lines. Nobody will significantly do anything to dismantle that system, maybe beyond increased private delivery of services. Nobody is ever going to try to introduce private payment because that is political suicide. Yep. So that's an example of something that the left achieved, that people hold up as a sacred tenet of our country. We have not had an issue like that, I would argue, since maybe the Charter, that significantly galvanized the population behind us. We are at serious risk of losing what should be some of the easiest people to pull on side because we're so caught up in academia. And it's not that academia isn't important. It is, and it informs our movement, and it's an invaluable part of our movement. It's, I'm not saying we should ditch it. I'm saying we're focusing too much on it. So that, I guess that's kind of what I want to tweak. It's not that, we shouldn't be taking a moral stand. It's that we have to keep our morals and keep our values, but package them in such a way that is digestible to the common man. Instead of campaigning on XYZ and it's all long-winded and nobody can understand what you're saying because you sound like a scripted robot. Go out there, talk like a normal person, like the right does. First off, stop talking like a scripted talk like a normal person. Number one. These are basically Liam's 5 points for success here, and this is my uneducated opinion here. Number one, talk like a normal person. Okay. Number two, for fuck's sake, get the working class back on side. Number three, make socioeconomic issues, as I've said, your primary calling. Number four, I've said this before in previous podcasts, have 3 to 5 simple promises that people can digest. 3 to 5 simple promises. Drill it into their fucking skull so they never forget what those 3 to 5 promises are. And number 5, for God's sake, get angry. And I don't mean angry like the right wing is angry. Get angry at the right wing. Get angry at corporations. Get angry at the conservatives that made us try this neoliberalism experiment that failed. Get angry about those things. Mm-hmm. Those are Liam's 5 rules for success. I'm not saying it'll work because I'm not an expert, but my God, that seems like common sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, your last point there, getting angry at the neoliberals, and the reason why this Liberal Party can't possibly do that is because
they come from that.
Exactly. They're supporting that same strain of thing. They haven't weeded out the old neoliberals yet, and that's why they can't possibly move in that direction. And I think that's ultimately why the messaging keeps failing. That they don't have many solutions. Like that's
because they don't want to make any structural changes. They want to perpetuate neoliberalism.
Well, exactly. And when you're talking about like a just transition in Alberta, moving to a net zero economy, unless you're willing to move away from your neoliberal policies, there is no way to do that in Alberta that doesn't severely fuck over the province. You need to have some very severe restructuring of the whole economy. And that absolutely requires direct public investment, and that absolutely requires the nationalization of vast corners of the provincial economy. Like, there's just no other way to do that would guarantee the same level of prosperity, the same level of employment that the old resource extraction model did. And because we're not willing to even, consider that, you're going to have no choice but basically have the working class lost to us. The idle hands are the devil's playground, and that's like Alberta's just going to get worse and worse because we're going to be, as the resource extraction industry is made to reduce its footprint in the provincial economy. Fewer and fewer people are going to be employed in it. They don't have any transferable skills from that sector to another sector. And unless we rapidly build
and retrain
the green, and retrain, they're going to have nothing to do but yell at our ministers. They're going to have nothing to do but sit around and get angry. But if we pay for them to go back to school, if we create new jobs, if we create new industries, then they will have something to do besides just sit around and get angry. Really as simple as that. But because we're not willing to consider it, we're going to be reaping what we sow at this point. And the only people right now that really seem to have any solutions are the people like Danielle Smith. And the solutions are illegal. But it doesn't matter. I mean, because there's solutions, and to be quite frank, like the Supreme Court doesn't have an army. Danielle Smith might. This is a scary thing, and I'm very worried about the future. I think most Canadians don't really realize this, but we are a very loosely governed federation, particularly with all of the powers that we devolve to a province like Quebec. If more provinces like Alberta try to get that deal, it's a very short road until we'll have no country at all.
It's like the States where the feds have no control.
Well, I mean, the States has a much more powerful central military, and so and they have massive central government spending, and so like constitutionally they don't have as much power over the states. But the power of the federal purse is much more powerful in the United States. Yeah. In Canada, the provinces actually do control a lot more of the day-to-day life of their citizens than the federal government does. And the most of the federal government's budget is just transfers. So if the provinces in Canada start having vastly different ideas as to how their citizens need to be governed, our country is not very difficult to break apart, is what I'm trying to say. We need to be very vigilantly guarding this country. And we're
young. Yeah. People forget we're a young country. Like, sure, we're in the G7, blah, 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 first world country, da-da-da-da. Guess what? We've only existed for 155 years. That's not very long.
And we've only had a universal suffrage model of voting since the 1960s. Like we used to, it's not since the 1920s that we had women were able to vote, and then it wasn't until the 1960s that the people over the age of 18, everyone over the age of 18 without property, and indigenous people were allowed to vote. So like our model of democracy is still very much in the experimentation phase. And this is why I'm a little bit annoyed when people try to imagine a time when politics was nicer and everyone was still wearing the boxing gloves. And the truth is that the reason why politics was nicer in past ages is that there just were fewer people that were involved in politics, and there was a whole swath of society that were completely censored and completely silenced. They didn't have a vote. They didn't have any sort of economic privileges or rights. It was just white men with property talking to white men with property. So of course they had nothing to swear about. Of course they had nothing to get angry about. Nowadays, we do have shit to be angry about. And so, like, I of course, we can denounce someone like this Moose guy for attacking Chrystia Freeland, but you know what? The right is also going to denounce BLM when BLM has a riot. But to be perfectly honest, I think that BLM supporters have every reason to riot. And so for me, as someone on the left wing, I support people in the left wing who sometimes do have expressions of political will that can be seen as violent. I'm not so ready to just go and stand on my moral high horse, because I see the fights that we're having in the political realm are a little bit more important than decorum. And be quite honest, if we could have a House of Commons where there is absolutely no rules as to what you could or could not say, there's no rules on what you would or would not be dressed in, that would be ideal for democracy. I think right now that we still have this model of an old boys club that we're trying to impose on a democratic country where everyone's allowed to speak, and of course those two things cannot be commensurate with one another. One has to give. Either we're going to keep this old boys model of everyone with their suit and tie that talks in fancy soliloquies, or we're going to have a real democracy where people talk like real people. And you know what? Sometimes real people say unpleasant things in unpleasant ways, but that's just the way democracy is, and we have to be willing to pull our sleeves up and get involved, get in the dirt again.
It's frustrating in a way for me to even have to consider getting angry. Basically, if Trudeau had done what he said he was going to do, I'd still be probably a fervently partisan liberal, number one. But number two, maybe there'd be more support for his positive politics that he calls it, which it's not really positive politics. I could spend a whole podcast episode unpacking that BS. But if it truly was positive politics, and he truly made some positive, huge structural changes beyond childcare, like I would say that's the only structural change he's made, the $10 a day childcare. Beyond that, for people who don't have children, that's going to, help them out, and he'd pursue more kind of that stuff, then maybe we wouldn't have to worry about the raising temperature, because he would have already lowered the temperature by addressing people's needs. But what he did instead is pretend he was going to address people's needs, campaign positively against an unpopular prime minister who was perceived as very negative, succeeded, won a huge majority, and then coasted. And here we are. We're at a crossroads. I don't want to get angry. People are angry. If you don't acknowledge it, if you sit there in your suit and tie and you smile and you act like everything's fine, it's just going to irritate people. You're going to sound smarmy. It's not that the left shouldn't be getting angry. I mean, they shouldn't be using racial slurs and shit like that. But they should be getting angry. They should be going after Galen Weston and the Loblaw Corporation. They should be going after the Sobe Corporation. They should be going after all of those big players. They should be planning contingency plans for workers in Alberta and Saskatchewan. They should be planning retraining programs for these people. But they're not. They're just twiddling their thumbs, and then they pop on TV every now and again to say nothing and lecture you on why you should think everything's fine. That makes me irritated as a progressive who voted for them initially. How do you think that makes right-wing people feel? And, I'm not, again, this isn't to assuage their values. I'm saying we can bring them back on side by winning them over with our values via acknowledging their anger and making structural changes. It is possible.
Yeah, it's just you need to give people a plan. That's all you really need. You need a project. And we were talking about, academia being part of the movement. I think that's where academia is best served, is the people that can elucidate the project and can explain the project. And I think right now we have a good sense of what we as leftists need to do. I mean, there's so many areas where we have been losing the political fight that we basically got to be fighting almost everywhere. But now we need to be telling people how they can be part of that fight. And that's the part of the response to Chrystia Freeland that I disliked, because it was people in the House of Parliament showing that they're using their power to denounce something, but the common man watching that isn't being invited along on that journey. They're not telling ordinary people how they can respond. And that's the problem. Ordinary people need to feel like they have the power to respond to guys like Moose, not your MP. There's only 338 MPs, but there are many millions of Canadians who can fight back against this sort of thing. We need to be modeling that kind of behavior for them. And you know, when you're talking about like the left become obsessed with identity politics and labels, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if it's just about labeling, if your idea of progressive politics is just increasing the number of people from disadvantaged communities in the system, that doesn't leave anything for white people or for white men in particular to do, and so of course they feel outside the system. But if you say, you know, this is a general political goal and we need all of your help to achieve these political goals, and left politics is not just about increasing the number of women, increasing the number of sexual minorities, of racial minorities, religious minorities in the community. It's also making them feel more comfortable to participate. It's changing our structures so that their input is more accepted, is more equitable. Then it starts giving tasks that white people can accomplish, because they can be part of drafting the new policies. They can be part of hiring the new people. We can be part of recreating our structures. They can be part of changing our own behavior and the way that we talk to one another and the way that we interact with one another. There's stuff for people to do. Right now, there isn't a lot for, you know, those people that he mentions, the cis white men, to do. You need to keep people busy. Even if you don't like them, you need to give them something to do. And I think everyone can help the general project of left politics. So you need to make sure everyone has a certain role. I don't think necessarily people are just inherently evil. I think a lot of them just have no clue what they're supposed to be doing, and they're gravitating onto the right wing because the right wing is they're very authority driven. They have a top-down model. They're like, look up to the leader, model his behavior, do what we're saying, here's our plan for everything. It doesn't necessarily make sense, but we want your money, we want your support, so come out to this January 6th rally, attack this female politician on Twitter. They know what they need to do. They have a list of tasks. They organize themselves. It's like what Jordan Peterson has his 12 rules for life. We need something like that. Here are the 12 things you need to do to be a leftist. You need a clear program of behavior that's modeled for people,
including a clear message. For God's sake, stop talking like a fucking robot.
Holy moly!
It drives me nuts. Yeah. There has to be some sort of compromise between message control and not sounding like a fucking robot. Yep. Like, it's infuriating to listen to some of these people talk. You don't even understand what they're saying. And Jacob and I aren't stupid people, but my God, and even, I can't imagine somebody, like, a stupid person would think trying to listen to these guys talk. Smart people can't even understand what they're saying. Good Lord. You know, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here either, saying I'm the smartest guy. I'm just saying ordinary people can't understand them. Right? The overt centralization of power in the Prime Minister's office is a huge structural error. And there's a disincentive to do anything about it because you have that power. You have that complete control. But then you create scandal after scandal after scandal for yourself because you have no idea what's going on in the far reaches of your government. You try to do something in the far reaches of your government and you fumble.
Yeah, and fundamentally, that's the reason why Chrystia Freeland got screamed at when she was at that town hall in Grand Prairie. Because she was in front of a group of people that were obviously unfriendly to her, and she was delivering messages that were so watered down and so completely irrelevant to their ordinary daily life. Her messaging on inflation, her messaging on the economy has been horrible. She's been forced by, as you said, like 24-year-olds in the PMO to deliver these absolutely terrible lines that do not get the public to support her. This is an incredibly, wonderfully intelligent woman who, when she speaks from the heart, like when she did on the Russia-Ukraine issue at the beginning of this year. She's so powerful. She's an amazing speaker. When you take off her PMO leash, she is an incredibly gifted leader who can really bring people on side. When she's forced to take the fall for the prime minister, which is what this looks like, she's basically been done with the inflation file. Of course she's going to get attacked. Like she's saying something that is only gravitating hate towards her. But if you let her be herself, she can succeed. And not just her, but many other ministers in Trudeau's cabinet have shown that ability. But I don't know if it's just Justin Trudeau doesn't want to share spotlight, or they just have an obsessive message control that they absolutely cannot walk away from. They're tied at the hip to these absolutely brutal lines that do not make them any friends or do them any favors.
Everybody rolls their fucking eyes at it except for Liberal partisans.
Nobody
wants to hear for the 50th time what you're going to... Sorry, for the 50th, excuse me. For the 50 billionth time, what the middle class is going to... the middle class and those working hard to join it. Fuck off with that and do something substantive for the middle class. I'm angry today because it's just making me... The more we talk about this, it's making me angrier and angrier about what we're not doing right.
Because the solution is so clear and they choose not to do it. Because they're like, I can win between 150 to 170 seats doing what I'm doing now, and so I'm just going to keep playing the same election over and over again until eventually I get the 170 model. Whereas, like, what Liam and I are saying, if you loosen your tongue a little bit, the realm of possibilities increases. You can either be down to 100 seats again, or you can be up to 300 seats. And that's the issue, is that they're so afraid of losing power that they're losing an opportunity to potentially gain a generation-shaping political win.
Take risks.
Because the conservative movement is not popular. The conservative movement is going so far to the right, so fast, on so many issues. They're so divided. If we get a really good message to unify people, there could be a fucking supermajority. We could be changing the Constitution. We could be fundamentally shaping the way that our society operates on a totally new level for this entire century.
Destroy them.
We have so many brilliant ideas, but we have no ability to enforce them because the government is obsessed with getting a sliver of a minority when they should be dreaming for a much, much higher goal. And their inability to have any fucking ambition is drowning us. It's absolutely drowning us.
We're spending too much time in the Liberal Research Bureau looking at pie charts and not enough time out there talking to ordinary people. And they would say, well, we go to talk to ordinary people all the time. Yeah, sure you do, with 5 points that you repeat. And then anything else that wasn't in your preconceived plan, you're not going to listen to. It might seem like a lot of attacking Trudeau, and, he's not the first. This started with Stephen Harper, right? So Stephen Harper, I was reading today, actually a Paul Wells article about just a lot of things, but one of the things it touched on was Stephen Harper and Kathleen Wynne's relationship. And so Stephen Harper and Kathleen Wynne had this notorious meeting. Kathleen Wynne, for those who don't know, ex-Premier of Ontario, Stephen Harper, ex-Prime Minister of Canada. They had a meeting. And Kathleen Wynne decided to try to sell Stephen Harper on increasing pension premiums, which is just a conservative no-no. Like, you're never going to win a conservative over on that if you're not arguing it the right way. And she was basically arguing like, oh, people need this increase, so they can retire. And Harper apparently smirked and said that Canadians have to save for their own retirement, And like just a classic conservative. I think you could sell certain conservatives on it, but you couldn't sell a Harper conservative on that. But Kathleen Wynne was upset, and she talked to the Star about it, and that was a mistake because then Harper froze her out for a whole year and refused to meet with her, which was again totally vindictive, and it's not Kathleen Wynne's fault. But this is what happens when a guy like Stephen Harper, with a preconceived notion of what he wants, meeting with somebody who is his political opposite. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't reject your political opposite. What I'm saying is it's a parallel to today's Trudeau ministers going into a meeting with a preconceived notion of what they want and what they don't want. And every government's going to have priorities, but for God's sakes, make your priorities make sense. Their priorities don't make any sense. And it's not that they don't have the ability to articulate a winning vision. We've seen Trudeau before articulate a winning vision. He's at his best when he's fired up. And lately he could have gotten fired up about inflation and corporate price gouging. Instead, what did they do a year or so ago? They gave $12 million to Loblaws for fucking fridges or something. Like, it's just like, what?
Yep.
Like, seriously? What? Like, how does that reflect on you? You're not doing anything structurally to change this for anybody. You're not. And no wonder people are angry. No, it doesn't excuse the racist, misogynistic, on some levels, rape and death threats that journalists and politicians, primarily women and minorities, have received. But for God's sake, people are angry. They're not going to stop being angry. If you don't do anything to change the structural situation in this country, people are just going to lose the plot, and our experimentation phase is going to go into a devolution phase or something. Like, it's just out of control.
To summarize everything, we have people on the right now who are coming up with some absolutely batshit crazy solutions to ordinary problems. But because they're solutions, they're getting play, they're getting traction, and they're becoming more popular. And the one thing we haven't talked about is that the Quebec election just began as well. And Francois Legault, who's also opening up his same sort of sovereigntist playbook, the same sort of slowly peeling powers away from the federal government and, isolating Quebec and isolating the Quebecois from the rest of the country, is also on the ascendant as well. And so we see, like, both in Alberta now and in Quebec, we see conservative movements are just, they're skinning the cat that is this country, and eventually we're going to be left with no fur. And we really, really, really need to start taking these threats seriously. And if we do not start providing a convincing alternative, it doesn't matter that the right wing is not super popular. It's just like in Quebec, there's a four-way split between the opposition. So what does it matter that Francois Legault is completely inept as a premier? I mean, the guy's accomplished nothing really, and he's had the absolute worst COVID outcomes. He's cruising to victory because there's no plausible alternative. That's how easy it is. If you don't get your message together, if you don't tell people, give them hope, give them some alternative, the one side that happens to be the most organized is going to win. No matter what their ideology is, no matter how coherent or incoherent their message, if they seem more organized, if they actually talk to the real problems, if they give everyone something to do, they're going to win. And we can't let it happen.
Yeah, I mean, well put. I think that was a great discussion. I hope you listeners enjoyed as well. And if you have anything to say, if you want to, send us hate mail. We haven't gotten any yet. We're still waiting for our first hate letter. So if you want to be the first,
got a few hate messages on Instagram, but we can bump up those numbers.
Yeah, so, help us bump up those numbers. You can send us hate at speechfromthethrone@gmail.com. It's all lowercase, all one word. You can even send us ideas for future episodes, or you can send us recipes or movies to watch, whatever you want. But you know what? Thanks for sticking with us. I know we've been angry lately. We want to stop being angry. We really would like to stop being angry.
Desperately.
But until we stop being angry, or until we talk to you again, take good care of yourselves, folks.
Bye.